Well, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and it is the main form that students and their families would use to apply for financial aid. It is the form that applies for the federal portion of a student's financial aid award. At Providence, we use also another form called the College Scholarship Service Profile, and that is the form students use to complete for institutional determination of eligibility. But the FAFSA is really the vehicle that students would use to apply for such things as a Pell Grant or a federal student loan, campus work study, and if parents are looking to finance through a Federal Plus loan program, that is also the form that they use to complete for any kind of consideration of that loan product. There's a lot, and I'd have to say I've been in financial aid for a really long time, and this is probably the most sweeping changes in my entire career. Not only is the timing of the form different for this year, and that's a kind of a one-time change, but the form has been shortened and simplified, primarily I think to help families identify more Pell Grant resources for them, and so they're hoping that more students through a simplified version will be able to apply, complete, and receive eligibility for Pell Grants. The form has been completely redesigned. There are a number of questions that have been shortened, so it's supposed to be simpler for the student to be able to complete and fill out. However, beyond that, there's been a lot of changes to the formula itself, and I think the terminology that families and aid offices have been used to using for years is also very different. A few of those big changes I would think is that the word is estimated family contribution or expected family contribution now is a student aid index, and it is called an index because it's no longer an assessment of a family's ability to contribute to educational expenses, but more an index that is going to be used to determine how much they can get primarily from Pell. So it's a very different kind of thought process. There is also changing the word where it used to be a family or a parent that would complete or a student, and they're now changing the terminology to a contributor. So a student or a parent is now a contributor toward educational expenses. They are changing the parent of who is defined as the parent of record in cases of separation and divorce, where the parent who provides the greater level of support most of the time now is that parent who claims the student as an exemption, wherein before it used to be the parent that the student lived with the most. So there's changes there. They are changing some of the types of income that are going to be included, the types of assets that are included. They are using a direct data retrieval with the IRS, which means that families really aren't going to be filling it out on their own. They're going to grant permission to the IRS to directly transfer their data to the form, making it thus simpler. And as a result, there's a number of questions that have been left off because it doesn't transfer directly from the department or from the IRS any longer. I think that for us, one of the biggest changes that not only has caused us to pause and think about what the impact is to our families, and definitely for our families, is the elimination of a number in college split. So in the past, if you had a determined contribution that was, let's say, $20,000, the thought was is if you had two in college, it was $10,000 for one, $10,000 for the other. Now it's just an index, and now it's that split isn't going to happen. So that index will be what a family is able to contribute out of income and assets, and that's where that index will come in. Not great. I don't want to say it's terrible. I think that it's definitely slow. And to give some perspective, we've been I think spoiled a bit by thinking or getting the information in where families can start completing as early as October. And there was a delay in the timing of when that form, because it's completely been revamped, was available. And it wasn't available until December 31st. Again, those in the aid community often thought that it was, midnight on that date. And since then, the availability has been it's not frequent. They have rollouts where they're calling it a soft rollout, and they only have the form open for periods of time, and then they'll close it down. So what will happen is that it gives the Department of Education time to work out some of those kinks or work on things that aren't quite working. But there's causing some frustration, again, from families that may feel they're in the middle of it, or that they can't gain access to something when they're reading that they need to get this material or this form done for colleges and universities to be able to provide financial aid to students. The other part of it is that as an aid office, and it's not just Providence, but any aid office, we're not going to see that data from families until mid-February at the earliest. We normally would have had that starting back in October. And so the impact has been very different for us, meaning that, all of our early decision students that have just been admitted to the class of 28, we have not had that financial aid form or the FAFSA from them to be able to determine federal eligibility. Instead, we've used our College Scholarship Service profile, and we understand what the calculation will do, but we've based our information on that in a way to get out information to our early decision candidates where that information or that aid or that offer of admission is binding, unless they can't make that work financially. So we're going to have to relook at all of those files again, relook at all of those students when the free application comes in. And it is not uncommon that, again, that we'll get different information on the FAFSA than we may have in the profile, primarily in the form of assets, because FAFSA will ask for information as of the day they file the form, and profile might have already been filed months back. So we'll have some differences there that we'll have to work with families through. We've changed some of our required deadline dates. We had a February date. We know that's not realistic for our families, so we've moved that back because we want to give our families enough time to get it done. We know it's coming, and I think not only Providence College, but it's a national rollout. So every college in the country is really trying to figure out how do we best work with our families to make sure that they have the information they need to make those important decisions about financing. That's a hard question. I think, as I mentioned before, I've been in financial aid for a really long time. I grew up in it, and when I think about the messaging about that first time that somebody is applying for financial aid, I always tell somebody you should do it at least your first year to see what your benchmark is and where you fall. It is again, if you have any interest in any student loan or financing, or you have any interest in a parent loan, then yes, fill it out. That is important for you to do so. But if you are a family that already know that you don't really want to finance or that you don't want to take debt, and you do not expect that you're going to have any eligibility for any of the institutional grant funds, then you could decide not to do it. I do want to caution our Providence families that if they do not do FAFSA, that we also won't deter, even if they use profile, we need both forms. To be able to put together a need-based financial aid award. So any student who wants to be considered for any of the institutional grant funds, they have to do both forms. And so again, it's a choice that families have. But if they think at any point in time that they want to fill it out, I would encourage them to do so. It's free, so there's no cost to it. But again, there are some families that just don't feel that it's going to be worth their time and energy. And if they have questions, colleges have net price calculators they can view. They can go to the Department of Ed website and do a quick calculator to see what that index may come out to be. So they could do that in advance of completing the application if they're unsure about where they fall. It is all over. You know, we have a fair amount of information on our website. We have somebody in our office that is also putting updates on social media. They're placing them on Instagram. We've got a Facebook page, and we're trying to add information there. We send communication out to our parents and send it periodically. We also share information with our students about our filing dates. I think that going to the Department of Ed website, they have a very kind of up-to-date and active site that allows students to be able to see what's going on at the time. And as you mentioned, there are headlines everywhere. You know, I just saw today, there's a headline from Forbes about tips for filling out financial aid forms and things you should be planning for to do in advance before you sit down and do that form. So it's definitely in the headlines all the time and daily. And if you've got questions, aid offices are a great place to just call and ask. We're fielding those questions now from our families. Our Office of Admission are great partners with us in terms of communicating that information to all prospective and new students. And so I think it's just being, you know, listening, paying attention, and reading everything in an effort to try and understand some of the changes that are on our horizon. This is a time for everyone to be patient. I think, you know, we know that it's delayed, so we don't want families to really get anxious about the timing of it. And if we've got published deadlines and a student is not near them and they're having trouble and difficulty navigating through the information, we just ask that let us know. You know, we also are moving deadlines as we hear kind of new updated stuff. So I think being patient, reading, understanding kind of where the changes or where the process is at the moment. The only other thing I think that in the time between a student actually completing the form and maybe, you know, when they first listen to this is, you know, start gathering your materials. It's a great idea, I think, if you start setting up an FSA account. You know, it takes several days to do an FSA ID and go to studentaid.gov to be able to gain access, because as a contributor, being the student and the parent, you need to actually approve the IRS data retrieval. You need to be able to go in and do that. And if you don't have the authentication first, it's going to delay the process before you can even start. So you can do the FSA ID now. That's independent of completing that FAFSA. Get that going, get your credentials, get your information, and it will just really streamline the process later. Read the instructions. Gather the materials you need. Again, they've asked some different questions about assets, even for our returning families who have been used to completing the form, eliminating some of the assets in the past. They're reintroducing certain assets, and on the income side, they're kind of pulling some of them back out. So I think just understanding some of those changes and noticing some of the things that are different would be a good use of someone's time.